The man was in my back seat. I hadn't picked him up. Her voice trembles as she recalls that freezing South Side night last winter in Chicago. She remembers the way the streetlights barely cut through the darkness, how her hands felt stiff on the steering wheel, and the strange heaviness in the air as she drove empty streets long past midnight. Most nights blend together, but this one stands out. The pale face in the rear view wasn't a trick of the light. By the time she understood what she was seeing, her sense of safety had already slipped away. Jasmine Brown rarely drove past midnight, but that winter night she found herself steering through the South Side's empty streets, the city's neon glow swallowed by the dark. The snow fell in thick, silent flakes, and her wipers squeaked like a warning. She zipped her jacket up to her chin, feeling the cold press in through the glass, and tried to focus on the road ahead. After 2 quiet drop-offs, her unease grew. The silence in her car felt denser than usual, and the flicker of the streetlights outside seemed to pulse with something she couldn't quite name. Her rideshare app pinged again, pulling her further south into unfamiliar territory. She slowed at the pickup point and clicked her hazard lights on, squinting at the name on her screen. Marco. The street was deserted. She waited, engine idling, watching the minutes tick by. That's when she saw him, a tall man standing alone beneath a flickering streetlight. He wore a dark coat and a beanie pulled low, but it was his deep-set, empty eyes that caught her attention. His pale face seemed to absorb the light, and for a moment Jasmine felt pinned in place by his stare. She looked away, fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. "Marco?" She typed into the app's chat, but there was no response. After a few more moments, she canceled the ride and pulled away, glancing in her mirrors as she turned the corner. The man was gone, but the memory of his eyes lingered with her, sharp and cold. The city blurred by as she tried to shake the feeling of being watched. She focused on the steady rhythm of her wipers and the faint hum of the heater, reminding herself that it was just another late shift. Still, every shadow on the sidewalk seemed to stretch a little too far, every shape just out of the headlights' reach. Another ride request came in nearby, and Jasmine accepted, eager to finish her shift and get home. She stopped at a quiet intersection, glancing at her phone to check the address. As she reached up to adjust her rearview mirror, her breath caught. The man's face stared back at her from the back seat. He sat perfectly still, his beanie pulled low, the sharp lines of his jaw and the pale, almost translucent skin making him look more like a reflection than a real person. His deep-set eyes met hers in the mirror, blank, unblinking, impossible to read. Jasmine's hands froze on the wheel. She hadn't stopped anywhere long enough for anyone to get in. She tried to reason with herself, to explain it away as a trick of the light or her own tiredness, but the air in the car felt heavier, colder. Her heart hammered in her chest. Jasmine pulled over at the next curb, heart hammering, the tires scraping against the ice-crusted gutter. She spun around, expecting to see him there, but the back seat was empty. No indentation in the cushions, no sign of anyone ever having been there. The doors were still locked, the windows fogged with her own breath and nothing else. She sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady her breathing. The street outside was silent, the snow muffling every sound. She checked the mirrors again and again, but the back seat remained empty. After a few minutes, Jasmine forced herself to drive home, every block feeling longer than the last. When she finally reached her apartment, her hands shook so badly she could barely fit the key in the lock. Inside, her roommate was still awake, scrolling through her phone. Jasmine dropped her bag and blurted out the whole story. The strange pickup, the man under the streetlight, the face in the rear view. She tried to make sense of it as she spoke, but the words felt thin compared to the cold weight in her chest. Her roommate listened, then nodded slowly. "That sounds exactly like the carjacking ghost on the south side," she said, her tone matter of fact. Jasmine frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. "There's an old story about a man who died in a carjacking around here. People say his ghost haunts drivers, especially at night. He's supposed to show up in your back seat or in reflections, looking for a ride home. It's an urban legend, but you'd be surprised how many people have stories like yours." Jasmine tried to laugh it off, but the sound didn't come out right. Her roommate shared a few more stories. Other drivers who'd pulled over to empty streets, people who'd glimpsed a pale face in their mirrors only for it to vanish. The idea of a ghost made her skin crawl, but it also fit too well with what had happened. The next morning, Jasmine deactivated her rideshare app and decided she'd only take daytime shifts from now on. She never drove the south side again. The memory of that night stayed with her long after. The heavy silence, the eyes in the mirror, the way the city's familiar streets could suddenly feel like a place she didn't recognize. Some stories don't have a neat ending. Jasmine never found out who or what she saw in her back seat. But sometimes, a single night is enough to change the way you see the road ahead. And in the dark, empty stretches of city or highway, you never really know what might be watching from the shadows. Luis Ramirez has spent most of his life on the road. In the summer of 2019, he was hauling a load of furniture from Dallas to El Paso, a route he'd driven dozens of times. The highways across Texas all start to look the same after a while. Long stretches of pavement, the occasional gas station, and the radio humming in the background. That night, the air felt heavy, and the heat radiated off the blacktop even after sunset. He was used to the monotony, the isolation, and the odd things you see in the middle of nowhere. But he always trusted his routine, and more than that, he trusted his GPS. Somewhere west of Abilene, his GPS screen froze, then urgently rerouted him onto an unfamiliar 2-lane road. The new route promised to shave 20 minutes off his trip. Luis hesitated, eyeing the empty fields and the narrow strip of asphalt ahead. But the schedule was tight, and he didn't want to waste time second-guessing a machine that had always gotten him where he needed to go. He turned off the main highway and followed the new instructions, the truck's headlights pushing a tunnel of yellow through the darkness. The road was rougher than he expected. Scrub brush crowded the edges, and the pavement narrowed until it felt like he was driving through a corridor cut out of the landscape. There weren't any houses, no ranch gates, not even a mailbox. After a few miles, the cell signal dropped out entirely. Luis checked the passenger seat for his paper map, but left it folded, telling himself it was just a shortcut. The radio faded into static. The only sound left was the engine and the tires humming against the road. He tried to shake off the unease. He'd driven stranger roads before, but 20 minutes in, he caught a flicker of headlights in his side mirror. At first, it was a relief, proof he wasn't alone out here. Then he realized the car behind him was gaining. It matched his speed exactly and flooded his mirrors with high beams, the glare bouncing off every surface inside the cab. Luis shifted his mirrors, but the light kept finding his eyes. He slowed down, hoping the car would pass. Instead, it slowed too, keeping the same tight distance, the beams never wavering. The road stretched straight ahead, no turnoffs in sight. The only landmarks were the occasional ranch sign, half hidden in the brush, and the outline of distant hills. Luis gripped the wheel tighter and kept glancing at the mirror, the high beams making it impossible to see who was driving. He thought about pulling over, but out here, there was nowhere safe to stop, and no one to call if things went sideways. The car stayed glued to him for miles. Every time he eased off the gas, it did the same. Every time he sped up, it followed. The tension built until his shoulders ached from holding himself rigid. Then, without warning, the lights behind him snapped off. The sudden darkness made the highway feel even more isolated. His own headlights were the only thing keeping the night at bay, but they barely pushed back the blackness. Luis's mind raced. Was the car stopping? Was someone getting out? He checked the mirrors, rolled down his window, and listened for footsteps or the crunch of gravel. But there was nothing. He drove on, slower now, every sense on edge. When he saw a dirt driveway leading off to the right, marked only by a sagging fence and an old barn in the distance, he made a split-second decision. He killed his lights and slipped down the driveway, heart pounding. The truck's tires crunched over gravel, and he eased to a stop behind a clump of mesquite, engine idling low. He watched the road through the gap in the trees. The car rolled up to the mouth of the driveway and stopped. No headlights, no movement. The driver didn't get out. They just sat there, a dark shape against the faint glow of the horizon. Luis held his breath and waited, counting the seconds. He could feel sweat running down his neck despite the air conditioning. Every instinct told him to stay put, to not draw attention. He kept his doors locked and his foot ready on the brake. The standoff stretched on. The car didn't move, didn't flash its lights, didn't even rev the engine. Luis tried to make out the shape of the driver, but it was too dark. After what felt like an hour, the car finally backed away, slow and deliberate, then disappeared down the road. The tail lights never came on. Luis stayed hidden for a long time, listening for any sign the car would return. When he finally felt safe enough to pull back onto the highway, he didn't look back. He rejoined the main route as soon as he could, ignoring the GPS and using the printed map he'd brought along just in case. He finished his delivery, but the memory of that night stayed with him. Since that night, he always double-checks printed maps and never blindly trusts his GPS again. The road can change in an instant, and sometimes, a simple wrong turn is all it takes to remind you how quickly routine can slip into something else. Some drivers find themselves reliving those moments long after the fact, especially when the ordinary turns uncertain. For others, that feeling of unease can come from places much closer to home. A tunnel, a stalled engine, and a routine drive suddenly gone wrong. Exhausted after a 3 a.m. shift, Emily Chen, a 24-year-old nurse in Seattle, steeled herself for the drive home through the Battery Street tunnel. The city felt quieter than usual, the streets slick with rain, headlights bouncing off puddles and painting the empty lanes in watery reflections. She kept her focus on the road, counting down the blocks to her bed, her mind already drifting to the warmth waiting at home. As she rounded the last corner before the tunnel, Emily noticed a stranded sedan parked on the shoulder, hazard lights pulsing orange against the wet pavement. She slowed just a little, scanning for any sign of its driver, but the car's interior was empty, the driver's door left ajar. No one stood nearby, not on the sidewalk, not in the shadows just beyond the reach of the streetlights. She kept moving, her tires hissing as she passed. The moment she entered the tunnel, her radio crackled to silence, a burst of static cutting off the music and leaving only the sound of her own breathing and the faint hum of the engine. The Battery Street tunnel always felt a little claustrophobic, even in daylight. Tonight, the yellowed, flickering lights overhead made the place seem smaller than usual, the concrete walls closing in on either side. Emily gripped the steering wheel tighter, watching the lines on the road disappear beneath her headlights. The tunnel stretched on, swallowing the city behind her, and she realized she had lost cell signal, her phone screen blank except for the time. Halfway through, her car gave a sudden shudder. The steering wheel vibrated in her hands, and the dash lights dimmed, then snapped back to normal. She tried to ignore it, though her chest tightened with every new sound. Another flicker from the overhead lights made the tunnel walls jump in and out of shadow. She pressed the gas, hoping to get through before anything else went wrong. My engine sputtered, then died. The car coasted a few yards before stopping entirely, headlights still on, but the rest of the dash dark. I turned the key once, twice. Nothing. The silence pressed in, broken only by the tick of the hazard lights and the faint echo of water dripping somewhere behind the concrete. My heart hammered. I checked my phone again. No service, no way to call for help. In the rear view, a tall figure stood just beyond my taillights. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The person was motionless, mostly hidden in shadow, but I could make out a hood pulled low and the outline of a long jacket. His face was lost in darkness, features blurred by the flickering light. He didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. The tunnel's narrow walls trapped every bit of fear inside the car with me. I stared, willing myself to find some logical explanation. Maybe another stranded driver, maybe someone walking home. But there was nowhere for him to have come from. No open doors, no footsteps echoing through the tunnel. Just this figure standing perfectly still, outside the reach of my taillights. I tried the ignition again, hands shaking. Still nothing. The lights overhead buzzed and flickered, shadows jumping across the tunnel walls. I kept glancing at the mirror, convinced the figure was getting closer, though he never seemed to move. My breathing sounded too loud in the small space, every second stretching out longer than the last. Then, out of nowhere, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness at the far end of the tunnel. The relief hit me all at once. Another car was coming. As it approached, the figure in the rear view was gone. I blinked, searching the shadows, but there was nothing. No sign anyone had been there at all. The other car slowed behind me. A man got out, gave a quick wave, and walked up to my window. He didn't ask any questions, just nodded and motioned for me to try the engine again. I did, and this time the car started on the first turn of the key. The dash lights glowed bright, the radio snapped back to life, and my phone buzzed with a flood of missed notifications. I thanked him through the glass, not trusting my voice to stay steady, and pulled out as soon as I could, never looking back. Even as I merged onto the next street, I kept glancing at my mirrors, half expecting to see that hooded figure standing in the glow of the tunnel, waiting. Since that night, I avoid the Battery Street tunnel whenever I can. Even in daylight, Emily now hesitates at the tunnel entrance, checking her mirrors before she drives through. Not every story happens in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes, the places we pass every day hold their own secrets, waiting for someone to notice or for the right moment to make themselves known. Andre Williams, 34, had delivered food all over his small Ohio city, and usually the late-night runs were the easiest. He liked the quiet, the way the world felt smaller, almost paused. Maple Lane was supposed to be just another stop, a pizza order at the end of a shift, nothing more. He didn't think twice as he turned onto the street, the GPS screen glowing softly in the dark. At first, everything looked typical. Lawns trimmed, fences straight, a few porch lights still burning. Someone's Christmas lights blinked half-heartedly in the cold, even though it was late February. It was the kind of quiet that felt safe. But as he drove further, the houses thinned, lights dimmed, and overgrown bushes loomed around number 118. The streetlights were spaced wider apart, leaving long shadows that crowded the road. The last house sat back from the street, half hidden behind tangled shrubs and a sagging fence. Its porch light glowed, but the rest of the windows were black, the whole place looking like it had been left to itself for too long. Andre parked at the curb, engine idling, and checked the order on his phone one more time. 118 Maple Lane. He grabbed the pizza bag, zipped his jacket, and stepped into the cold. The air felt heavier here, the usual suburban calm replaced by something watchful. He pushed through the gate, the hinges groaning. The path to the porch was uneven, cracked by roots, and the bushes brushed his arms as he passed. He hesitated at the porch, torn between protocol and the faint metallic scent in the air. The rule was clear: never go inside. Leave the food, knock, walk away. He was ready to do just that when a voice floated down from somewhere inside the house. "Come in. The door's open," it whispered from upstairs. Andre stopped, one foot on the first step. The front door hung open, just enough for the porch light to spill across the warped floorboards. He tried to convince himself it was nothing. A tired homeowner, maybe elderly, maybe unable to get to the door. He cleared his throat, tried to sound steady. "Delivery for 118? No answer, just a slow creak from somewhere above, like someone shifting their weight on old floorboards. The metallic smell grew stronger, mixing with dust and something damp. A clock ticked somewhere deeper in the house, sharp and steady, the kind of sound you don't notice until everything else is silent. He called out again, voice quieter. "I've got your order. I'll just leave it here." A pause. Then, from the top of the stairs, the same voice, this time clearer. "Thank you for coming. I've been waiting." Andre's skin prickled. He set the pizza bag on the porch, backing away. Every instinct told him to leave, but his eyes flicked up to the landing inside. He could just make out a figure standing in the shadows, face hidden, unmoving. The words seemed to press against his chest, heavier than the air, impossible to ignore. He stepped back off the porch, boots scraping the wood. The metallic smell clung to his jacket, and the ticking clock grew louder in his ears. He didn't look back as he moved down the path, only hearing the faint creak of floorboards overhead and the wind rattling the bushes. His footsteps echoed behind him as he bolted into the car, heart racing, only to find the order vanished from the app when he looked. He sat behind the wheel, breath shallow, staring at the empty space where the order information should have been. He checked the restaurant's number, called his manager. No record of the delivery, no ticket for 118 Maple Lane. The address didn't match any recent orders. His hands shook as he set the phone down. Andre drove home with the radio off, windows up, every streetlight feeling too far away. He replayed the voice in his mind, the way it had known he would come, the way it had waited. He thought about the figure at the top of the stairs, the open door, the metallic scent that still lingered in his nose. He tried to reason it out, a prank, a mistake, a glitch in the system, but nothing fit. He didn't sleep much that night, and when he did, he dreamed of ticking clocks and empty houses. From that night on, Maple Lane orders were a boundary he refused to cross. Sometimes the most unsettling moments are the ones that start out feeling ordinary. The familiar can turn strange in a heartbeat, leaving you to wonder what you might find waiting at the end of a quiet street. We don't always notice the moment when routine slips into uncertainty. Alone in a car, on a quiet street or an empty road, small details take on new weight. What we fear most when we're alone isn't always the obvious threat, but the way the world can shift. How a place, a routine, or a tool we trust can suddenly leave us exposed. Jasmine's reflection cracked her sense of safety. The routine rideshare shift on Chicago's South Side became something else the instant she saw that pale face in the rearview mirror. She'd trusted the familiar rhythm. Pick up, drop off, move on. But the moment her eyes met his in the glass, the car felt smaller, the street outside more distant. It wasn't just the possibility of danger that unsettled her. It was the way her mind raced to fill in the silence, to explain the impossible. Alone, with no one to ask for a second opinion, every glance in the mirror became a test of what was real. Luis's GPS detour left him blind. For years, he'd relied on technology to guide him across Texas, believing that algorithms and maps would keep him safe. That night, a glitch rerouted him down a 2-lane road he'd never seen before. The darkness pressed in, and the only sign of life was a car that matched his every move, headlights burning into his mirrors. Isolated, Luis realized how quickly trust in a device could become a liability. When the GPS failed, he was left with nothing but his own instincts. No signal, no backup, no easy way out. The fear wasn't just the car behind him, it was the sudden awareness that the safety net he'd counted on could dissolve without warning. Emily's stalled engine in the Battery Street tunnel stripped away her last defenses. The hospital shift had been long, and the drive home should have been simple. But as she passed the empty sedan and her radio cut to static, the city's familiar sounds faded. The tunnel's yellow lights flickered, the walls closed in, and then her car died. Alone, with no cell service, and only the echo of dripping water for company, Emily's mind seized on every detail. A figure in the rear view, unmoving in the shadows, became the center of her attention. In that moment, hypervigilance set in. Her breathing, the tick of the hazard lights, the flicker of movement at the edge of sight. The mind, searching for patterns and threats, made every second feel longer, every shadow more dangerous. Andre's vanished order erased the boundary between routine and the unknown. Delivering food late at night was nothing new, but the house at the end of Maple Lane felt different. The bushes pressed in, the porch light barely held back the dark, and the metallic scent in the air hinted at something wrong. When the voice called from upstairs and the app erased the delivery, Andre was left with questions and a chill that didn't fade. The rules he'd followed, never go inside, always check the order, suddenly seemed thin. Alone, he had no one to confirm what he'd heard or seen. The emptiness of the street, the silence of the house, made it impossible to shake the feeling that he'd crossed into a place where normal rules no longer applied. Each of these stories turns on a moment when technology, routine, or place stops providing comfort. The rideshare app, the GPS, the car's engine, the delivery order, each tool was supposed to keep its user anchored, guided, and protected. But in the wrong moment, they became reminders of how quickly control can slip away. When you're alone and something goes wrong, even familiar places can become hostile. The mind, left without outside reassurance, starts to fill the gaps with its own fears. Isolation changes the way we see and react. Alone, we notice the sound of our own breathing, the way headlights stretch across an empty road, the shape of a figure that might not be there at all. The brain, cut off from outside help, becomes its own worst enemy, amplifying every uncertainty, replaying every unexplained detail. Jasmine questioned her memory of the man in the mirror. Luis wondered if the car was ever really there. Emily tried to convince herself she hadn't seen anyone in the tunnel. Andre checked and rechecked his phone, hoping for a rational answer. The fear isn't just of what's outside, but of how quickly doubt can take hold when we're left alone with our thoughts. These moments linger because they force us to confront the limits of what we know. We expect technology to work, routines to hold, places to stay familiar. When any of those fail, the foundation cracks. Even after the engine restarts or the sun comes up, the memory doesn't fade. The next time we drive a dark road or enter a tunnel, the old anxiety returns, quiet, persistent, hard to shake. When technology, routine, and place all fail, what guard do we have left against the dark? Some stories linger long after the engine cools and the headlights fade. The reason these tales stay with us isn't just because they're strange or inexplicable, but because they reveal how easily the familiar can become uncertain. We carry a quiet trust in our routines, locking the car, checking the mirrors, following the same roads home. When something disrupts that pattern, even for a moment, it exposes how fragile our sense of safety really is. The fragility of safety is what gives these stories their staying power. Take Jasmine's night on the South Side. She was used to the rhythm of her late shift, the city outside her windows, the way every ride followed the same script. But the instant she saw that face in her rearview mirror, someone she hadn't picked up, someone who shouldn't have been there, her world shifted. The car, once a place of control, felt suddenly foreign. The tools she relied on, her mirrors, her locked doors, offered no explanation or protection. That single moment, when routine cracked and fear slipped in, left her questioning everything she'd trusted about her work and her city. The story sticks because it reminds us that safety is never as solid as we want to believe. Just as powerful is the way these stories make the ordinary unsettling. The settings aren't distant or fantastic. They're the streets we drive, the tunnels we pass through, the houses we deliver to. Andre's experience on Maple Lane is a reminder of how quickly the familiar can turn. He'd walked up countless porches before, delivered food to plenty of quiet houses. But the overgrown bushes, the porch light burning in a sea of darkness, and the voice from upstairs turned a routine delivery into something that followed him home. The metallic smell, the empty windows, the vanished order on his app. Every detail was ordinary, yet together they became something he couldn't explain. That's why the story lingers. Because anyone could find themselves on a street like Maple Lane, and anyone could hear a voice that shouldn't be there. These stories work because they're believable. There's nothing outlandish about a rideshare driver seeing something strange in the mirror, a trucker being followed on a dark road, a nurse's car stalling in a tunnel, or a delivery driver finding a house that feels wrong. The fear comes from the slight shift, the subtle moment when the world doesn't behave as expected. That's what makes these tales so effective. They spread precisely because they sound like something that could happen to anyone, anywhere. We listen and remember because they ask us to imagine ourselves in the same situation, making the same choices, feeling the same chill when the rules no longer apply. The lack of closure is another reason these stories stay with us. None of the drivers found solid answers. Jasmine never learned who or what was in her back seat. Andre never saw the face at the top of the stairs. The events refused to resolve neatly, leaving gaps that our minds rush to fill. The mind's need to understand, to explain, makes these stories echo long after the night ends. We replay the details, searching for a rational explanation, but the silence and uncertainty only make the memory sharper. The more we try to reason it out, the more the story works its way in. The effect isn't just psychological. These encounters shape how the drivers move through the world. Jasmine avoids certain neighborhoods now. Andre won't deliver to Maple Lane. A single unexplained moment is enough to change a routine forever. The stories become part of their lives, and by listening, part of ours. Most of all, these stories remind us that the line between routine and the unknown is thin. A quiet street, a familiar dashboard, a trusted app. Any of them can become the setting for something you can't explain. That's why we remember them, why we share them, and why we look over our shoulders a little more often on the way home. We may never know the full truth, but these stories remind us that the boundary between routine and haunted is thinner than we think. Every road home carries its own shadows. What have you encountered off the beaten path? These accounts linger because they ask us to look closer at the familiar, to remember that even the most ordinary drive can hold a moment that doesn't add up. The open endings leave space for your own questions, your own memories of nights when something felt just a little off. If you've ever felt the chill of uncertainty on a late-night drive, share your own story below. And if these stories left you watching your mirrors, hit subscribe for more real accounts of the unknown.